Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn. In today's episode, we're talking about Nico Collins in terms of wide receiver projection. So, this is going to be one of the first videos I'm doing on this particular topic, but we're going to try to project Nico Collins. We're going to look at his data, look at his production, and everything else, and kind of see what 2024 might be for him. So stay tuned until the end of the video where I give my final projections for Nico Collins. But let's get right to this video. So first off is the setup. The setup is simply this. The Houston Texans selected Michigan wide receiver Nico Collins, 89th overall in the 2021 NFL draft class. Since that date, he was rather anemic from a production standpoint, but all of that changed in 2023 when he broke out in year three with 1,297 yards and 8 touchdowns from his previous 400 plus yard seasons with 1 to 2 touchdowns. A massive breakup like that can raise suspicions about whether he is a one-hit wonder or can duplicate that success in the future. That will be examined today as we discover and uncover his pre-draft and post-draft profile. So in many ways, Nico Collins is probably one of the biggest surprises from last year's wide receiver groups, other than Puka Nacua. He'd probably be the second biggest surprise at the position. And anytime you have a major breakout like this, there's that question lingering in the back of your head is, can he do it again? Because a lot of times wide receivers typically have to break out year one, year two, and usually by year three, if he doesn't break out by then, it might be time to move on for the most part. So in Nico Collins' case, he broke out right at year three. Which is good, but what is the future for him, based on everything? So that's what we're going to look at. So first off, taking a look at his college football pre-draft profile. Taking a look at offensive market share data. His data wasn't the best. He had a 51 percentile receiving market share score. He had a 52 percentile total offensive market share production score and 56 percentile in terms of touchdown market share. When you look at the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, the All-Pro averages at the position, he didn't hit anywhere near those averages at the position, which is a concern. And when you get to efficiency, he did do good efficiency score. So Collins would be considered one of those prospects where he had average production with great efficiency. So the question is, or simply put, the projection is that even though he wasn't the most productive player, he had great efficiency scores. So if he goes to the NFL level, he might be able to live up to that efficiency versus his actual market share production. This doesn't happen all the time. The vast majority of the time, if you have above average market share, significantly above average market share data, with good efficiency, you become a really good wide receiver. Rarely do you have situations, they happen, but not often, where you have a guy who has great efficiency with average market share production. So from that standpoint, Nico Collins was a little bit of an outlier. He wasn't really with what is considered normal for wide receiver success at the NFL level. Now, when you get to athleticism traits, he was very athletic. He had 84 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 86 percentile in terms of speed, and 85 percentile in terms of flexibility. Very athletic profile, not elite level athleticism. Again, elite level athleticism, based on my definition, is somebody who has 90 plus percentile explosiveness, speed, and flexibility. You don't have to have elite level athleticism to be a good wide receiver. The vast majority are just above average in the 60 to 70 percentile range. But at least in Nico Collins' case, he is above all those areas. So he had all pro, Pro Bowl athleticism traits at the position, but his production, market share wise, wasn't the best. So again, that's kind of what his data really says. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, adjusted production takes a look at the strength of schedule, the strength of team, and of course the age of a prospect. When you look at all those different factors, Collins, age-wise, wasn't the youngest, but he was at a decent age score. His MSA rating wasn't the best. Again, much of that was because of his regular market share data, but his pass score was in the 70 percentile. So based on his overall data, he didn't quite hit near the Pro Bowl All-Pro averages at the position, but he did hit at least above the starter averages. So at least you had that to kind of hang your hat on with him. Is that this is a player who has starter potential, but he does have some concerns because of his market share data. So that's kind of the biggest thing with him in terms of projection. Nico Collins, in terms of his pre-draft profile, he had an 80.28 out of 100 overall data score. Based on his data, he was kind of in between McCole Hardman and DK Metcalf as a prospect due to average market share with good efficiency scores. Um, Metcalf was a much more productive player compared to Hardman, but Collins was kind of in that little middle area for him. He was not a surefire wide receiver based on data, at least a star wide receiver based on data, but he did have the data indicative of a future upside candidate, and that upside was unleashed in 2023. So, taking a look at his actual NFL production, this is how good Nico Collins was in 2023. In terms of his target market share, he was 89 percentile. His receptions was in the 92 percentile. His yardage was 97. His TDs were 95. His first downs were 94, and his yards per route, or I should say yards per reception, was 86.49 out of 100. Now, when you look at his previous years in 2021, 2022, he wasn't quite near any of those 80 to 90 percentile ranks, which is a big jump up in production in many ways. Then, of course, when you look at his micro data, so micro data deals with a per snap basis. His yards before contact per route was decent. His yak was tremendous, 88.96 percentile in terms of his ability to make plays after the catch, which was a big driver for his production. And in terms of ADOT, it was, or average depth of target was 55, and then his broken tackles is 96.87 out of 100, the best season he's had thus far as an NFL player for those circumstances. Taking a look at some more micro production, his drop percentage was surprisingly very good. So again, didn't really have a whole lot of drops. His quarterback rating was 94.78 out of 100 in terms of when he was targeted. What was the quarterback rating for the quarterback? And then TD percentage was great. First down percentage was great. And again, all these numbers are much higher than what happened in 2022 and 2021. Getting to his overall production by year. So macro production takes into account, yardage, first downs, touchdowns, stuff like that. He was 99 percentile in terms of his macro production based on those metrics, based on advanced statistics. His interception percentage was 48 percentile. His efficiency, which takes into account per snap basis data, was 96.64, and then Rex Star was 99.93 out of 100, which is a general ranking of production plus efficiency for him. And again, this was all better than expected. Now, when you look at his advanced statistics, he did have kind of an upward slope. So you can kind of see as a rookie, wasn't the best, and then he kind of got into the 83rd percentile in 2022, and then he peaked, or I should say his production went up in 2023. So these are good numbers to see, but I think the bigger question is what matters about these numbers? Because I just rattle off a bunch of statistics, and a lot of you guys are like, okay, well, what matters out of all these statistics? Does it really matter? Does drop percentage matter? Does yardage matter? And this is what the data says. So these charts can kind of give you an idea of wide receiver statistics to win correlations. The biggest data point that really matters to advanced wide receiver data in terms of wins is touchdowns. Touchdowns by far is the biggest indicator in terms of actually winning football games, which he was very high in last year. His first down percentage also really important. Yards before contact is important. Yak is important. Yardage in general is important. Breaking tackles, etc. All those different things are important. Things like average depth of target, not so much. Drop percentage, not so much. Targets, even, not so much. Even receptions to a certain extent, not so much. So these numbers, other than fantasy football purposes of winning a guy who has a high amount of receptions, don't really correlate highly to NFL production. And then by the same token, when you look at the other data points, so these are like the bigger general statistics at the position. The biggest indicators for long-term success at the wide receiver position in terms of that is success percentage, which is a statistic from Pro Football Reference. It deals with a wide receiver's ability to get first downs or get really close to getting a first down at different downs and distances. Another thing that's really important at the position in terms of this data also comes down to catch percentage, yards per target. Those are really, really, really big indicators at the position. But this is just a generalized ranking, so this kind of gives you an idea of what the correlations are at the position. Based on this foundational data, so the reason why I showed you all that, based on this foundational data, I was able to formulate a win correlation score for Nico Collins. So taking all of Collins's production data, taking his, everything you could think of, and then giving a generalized score based on what correlates the most to wins, I was able to formulate that Nico Collins had a 98.38 percentile win correlation season in 2023. So he would be considered the fourth best wide receiver that season compared to his peers based on data, which is really good. But the biggest question mark though is that that's an 80-point differential in the course of a year. So in 2022, his rank was 84 percentile, and he went from the 84th best wide receiver in terms of winning football games to the fourth best wide receiver in terms of winning football games. This is partially why Collins is ranked wide receiver 9 to 26 at worst in terms of fantasy football purposes, because we really don't know which Nico Collins we're going to get. Again, he didn't have a regular breakout in terms of his rookie season, his second year in the league. And then again, you kind of wonder, like, is this real? Is this a real situation? And he also has more competition as well. But let's dive into the data to again find some comparisons. So based on all this data that I've done in terms of finding win correlations at the position, what are some of the comparisons? Who would we compare him to? What are some of the careers that this looks like to kind of get a better idea or grasp on who Nico Collins might be in the future? Okay, so based on this chart right here shows you the biggest rank differentials for age 24 wide receivers between age 23 to 24. So if it's a negative number, that means that player went from, at least in Justin Jefferson's case, he was the third best wide receiver in 2022, and he went from being the third best to the eighth best based on the data ranking I was able to formulate. And then at the very top, you have Tyrell Williams, who had a 122 rank differential, meaning he went from essentially, one of the, I don't know the general ranking for it, but basically he went 122 points up in terms of his general ranking in terms of win correlation that year. So, which is one of the largest swings that we've seen since the 1994 NFL season, based on this data. And this is also era adjusted. So again, I'm not comparing the statistics of a wide receiver back in 1994 to today. I'm comparing it to that era in which they played, and then after giving that adjusted production, then making the comparisons here. So just so you guys know what I'm talking about. Now, based on this data, I was able to filter it down to the wide receivers with 50 or higher jump in production to get us to this list right here. So essentially, this kind of shows you, okay, what was the big jump? What was the difference in the ranking? And in terms of Nico Collins, as we know, as I just showed you, he was about an 80-point swing between where he was in 2022 to where he ended up in 2023. And these are all the wide receivers that are in that general ranking from 50-point difference all the way up to 122. So you can see the guys on the list. You got guys like Chad Johnson, Michael Floyd, Greg Williams, Santana Moss, Reggie Williams, Tyler Boyd, and then so on and so forth. And that kind of gives you an idea of that. Now, moving on to filtering it down again, I decided to filter it down to wide receivers with 50 or higher a jump in production with top five performances. Because again, Nico Collins had a top five finish. So before we just looked at top 10 finishes, but Collins had a top five. I mean, he was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL last season based on his overall statistical data in terms of contributing to winning football games. So based on this, who were the three wide receivers who were in that similar boat in terms of top five performances based on win correlation and a really big swing in terms of how they performed from last year. And based on this list, you got guys like Reggie Williams, Marcus Robinson, and Nico Collins. Based on this data, so if the first wide receiver we're going to take a look at here in terms of his career, and again, I'm not trying to make the comparison that Nico Collins is Marcus Robinson. I don't think that's very fair to do based on all the data that I have. But this is just a generalized idea, okay, of what wide receivers in the past have done with this swing in production essentially. And in terms of Marcus Robinson, as you can see here, in 1998, his production wasn't really there at all. But he had a major jump in terms of 1999. In 1999, Marcus Robinson was the fourth best wide receiver in terms of wins, contributing to winning football games in 1999. And then in 2000, he had a drop, and a lot of that was health wise. He had a lot of injuries after that and inconsistent play after that. And on top of that, he played on the Chicago Bears, which were kind of a dumpster fire in terms of their quarterbacks and everything else like that. But that kind of shows you a little bit of a potential career trajectory based on the wide receivers who tested kind of similar to Nico Collins, just based on that swing in production. Okay, the difference between where they were before into where they are now from 1 year basis. Then of course we get to Reggie Williams. Reggie Williams, of course, was also a first round wide receiver. A lot of people may not remember Reggie Williams, but he was a fantastic wide receiver. And in terms of his production, here. Didn't really do much in 2004, 2005. Had a jump in 2006, so he had kind of a breakout year there. And then finally broke out massively in 2007, and he was the third best wide receiver that year based on his data. Again, this is era adjusted for the era in which he played. And then in 2008, he had a drop in production, and then he was out of the NFL. And most of the reason why Reggie Williams was out of the NFL after that point were injuries on top of off the field issues. He had a lot of off the field issues. I'm not going to mention all of them because I don't want my channel to get banned or anything, but you can look it up on any source to kind of see all the issues that Reggie Williams had. But he was a very talented wide receiver and was very productive. But again, there was those issues there. So in terms of that, we because of that, because Marcus, Robinson is had all those injuries, and because of the fact that Reggie Williams also had the off the field issues, it's not fair to compare him to those guys because you can't really anticipate Nico Collins having a lot of off the field issues. You can't really anticipate him having a bunch of injuries because injuries are definitely kind of random to a certain extent. So because of that, I think we have to go back to the list again and kind of look like, okay, coming back to this, let's take a look at the 50-point differential wide receivers with top 10 production, and then each wide receiver who ranked in the top 10 who fell off by average of 33 points. So essentially, I went back to the rankings and I kind of went, okay, just to be fair to Nico Collins, what was the drop off? So wide receivers who typically had that big jump in their production, a 50-point or higher swing in their production, what usually happened the year after that major jump? And just to be fair, we added the top 10 ranking wide receivers in this list. And based on that data, as you can see, most of the wide receivers had a major swing back to the mean, essentially, back to what they were accustomed to being before that. So, like for example, Reggie Williams went from one of the top five best wide receivers in the NFL to being 84 in terms of his ranking, or at least an 84 swing downward, I guess. Tyler Boyd also high end, top 10 wide receiver 1 year, and then he went 60 points in the other direction. Marcus Robinson 52 points in the other direction. Michael Floyd went 27. Terrell Williams went 20. Santana Moss went 10. Chad Johnson went 6, and Greg Jennings went 1. So that can kind of show you that guys like Greg Jennings and Chad Johnson didn't have that major swing back from a major jump. So you could say that Greg Jennings and Chad Johnson, in many ways, were a clear indicator of a legit jump in terms of their credibility as an NFL wide receiver, in terms of production standpoint. So it was basically an honest signal. It wasn't a false signal. It was an honest signal that, okay, this guy is the real deal. And because a lot of times, and that's what I tell people a lot on here, is you can't just look at a 1 year breakout and then crown the guy and say he's going to be the next best thing. You can't do that. You need more information. It's just it's going to take time. I know we want to jump to conclusions on everything, but it takes time, data-wise, to really get a strong grasp on what is an honest signal, what is an honest to goodness, really good wide receiver versus a trash wide receiver. It takes some time to figure that out. It's not always going to be 1 year and you finally know. You're going to have to get more data, more information to really make that confirmation. So Based on this, I think that you can honestly say that Nico Collins might be too early to really project him. I think we need another year of production to really get a good grasp of him. But despite all this, despite all this, in terms of being fair to him, I think you also have to look at another thing, which is that Nico Collins does have a lot in common with Marcus Robinson. So, out of all the wide receivers that are on this list, I went back and kind of did some comparisons based on their pre draft profiles. And the best wide receiver who really showed up the most in terms of a pre draft comparison for Nico Collins was Marcus Robinson. Both Nico Collins and Robinson had inconsistent production at the college level. Nico Collins was better though, but both had inconsistent production. When you look at athleticism, they had very similar athleticism traits for the era in which they played. They had similar MSA rating, similar pass rating in terms of the competition that they faced. And I think in many ways, Collins might be the better version of Robinson and has the potential to not share the same fate as Robinson due to other variables involved, which is simply this. Marcus Robinson never had CJ Stroud throwing the football. Marcus Robinson never had other wide receivers coming to the fold like Stephon Diggs and other players like that to kind of come into the fold to really, make that team better than the teams that Marcus Robinson was on the Chicago Bears. So that's another thing to kind of bring up. But I think in terms of many things, this Marcus Robinson comparison, though, just from a pre-draft profile and post-draft profile, makes more sense than Chad Johnson or Greg Jennings. But at the same time, you could make the argument that Nico Collins might be the next Chad Johnson or Greg Jennings because of the quarterback that he has throwing him the football. Chad Johnson, of course, had Carson Palmer. Greg Jennings had Aaron Rodgers, and a lot of people have compared C.J. Stroud to Aaron Rodgers in terms of his talent. Some people even compared him to Dan Marino. At least from a data perspective, I would compare him to Dan Marino. But this is an interesting, situation here with that. Now, in terms of outlook for Nico Collins, because again, we got a lot of data. I know I might have melted your minds at this point, but I think Nico Collins is probably one of the best wide. He was one of the best wide receivers in 2023. And he went right back into a unique situation where he will catch passes from a talented passer in C.J. Stroud, along with numerous receiving threats to take the pressure off of him to produce. Most wide receivers do not repeat top 10 success, especially wide receivers with the path that Collins has taken. But I do believe that he will be in the hunt for top 12 to 24 production in 2024. No matter what happens in 2024, Collins will remain a fascinating prospect to me due to how rare it is for a wide receiver with his pre-draft profile to become a top-end producer at the position. So just from my perspective, from my perspective of how I think about the game and think about evaluation, he is a fascinating player to watch because he did something that is very rare. It's very rare for a player to do this type of production. And in many ways, I would hope for an outcome to be him being like a Greg Jennings and just being 1 point different from where he was ranked last year. Or even Chad Johnson be a couple points less, but still high, still a top 12, top 24 wide receiver. But I want to know from you guys, I want to know from you guys, where do you have Collins ranked in 2024 and what his future will be in the Texans offense long term? These are questions that I have because honestly, it's just interesting to me. I think it just is. I think he's a very talented wide receiver. I think he's in a great spot. Again, other than Reggie Williams, again, it was more in a run-heavy offense there. And of course, Marcus Robinson was on the Bears. He's not on that. He's not in that situation. He's on a fairly strong football team. So, and they have more wide receivers that were added. So maybe there might be less production for Collins because of the competition for targets and touches, maybe. I mean, that might be something to look at. But I think he is one of the more underrated fantasy football assets in this draft because it's rare for a guy to produce like this. And you don't want to miss out on the chance that could be the next sort of Chad Johnson based on production, not based on his style, okay? Just based on his production ability, the next Chad Johnson. Or even Brandon Ayuk, because the biggest thing that he really brings to the table, that Ayuk brings to the table, is that yak ability, the ability to catch a football and take it to the house or take it really far upfield. Those are things that are really special about him, and because of that, I want to see what he does in the future. I'm excited about him, but let me know in the comment section below, how do you feel about it? Thank you guys so much for watching. Check out my other stuff at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, consider checking out my Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter account, at Geometrics, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.